We have a very special webinar planned. So I'd like to introduce Adam Lesky. Adam is the co-founder and chief growth officer at Trailed. And today he's going to talk to you about Trailed's native Acumatica integration and how it can help you achieve AP efficiency and total financial control. So, Adam, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming along and carving out another hour of your day or 45 minutes to join us and the group at Stellar One just to find out a little bit more about Acumatica and the capabilities of extending the platform into making it even more automated and streamlined for your organization. So I'll try and get through this deck as quickly as possible because I really do hate presentation decks. I much prefer to get into the raw product and talk about customer problems and really get into the thick of your businesses. So we'll try and power through this. But obviously, as Derek mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Trailed, so love to come in and jump in and do these webinars every so often. It's really a privilege now to be able to do this with Stellar One and present the solution to you guys and what we can do in terms of the Acumatica ecosystem. One of the big things that I sort of want to talk about is where the organization came from. So, my family business started, we still operate in it, but in the agriculture manufacturing space, and we were operating, approximately 25 different farms. We were distributing, a volume of chicken and pork to the equivalent of like Walmart in the US. So we were doing, we're buying off a lot of different suppliers for things like wood chips off farms and things like that. And we were processing probably $3 to $4 million worth of AP a week. And we had at that point, we had three AP staff running the process from everything from invoice entry, manual mail validation to purchase orders, checking if inventory items have been receipted, processing, prepared batch payments, everything like that. So, unfortunately, back in 2017, we'd received a supplier invoice from a normal supplier we'd worked with for the last 20 years. And it looked, completely normal. And luckily enough, one of those three AP staff noticed that the payment details had been changed on that supplier invoice. So they called the supplier, validated the information, updated that payment information in Acumatica, and obviously made the payment. 2 weeks later, we get a phone call from the supplier who we've worked with for 20 years to say, "Hey, has something gone on? We've worked with you guys for years. We've never had a problem with payment. Where did that, $175,000 go? We've been buying off you. You've been buying off us for years." We said, "What do you mean? It's been paid." And that pin drop moment of, "Oh, what do you mean you haven't got the funds?" And it turned out that basically a fraudster had been sitting in one of our employees' emails for about 30 days. And they, as a part of that process, had basically analyzed the conversation history, intercepted one of the supplier invoices, changed not only the bank details but also the phone number on the document. So when our AP team called the supplier, little did they know they called the supply number off the invoice, which had been compromised, not the supply number off a Google search. So they'd spoken to the fraudster. They said, yes, there are updated payment information for our Melbourne office, not our Western Australian office. The payment details got updated and the payment got made. After nearly 3.5 years of litigation and trying to deal with the Hong Kong federal government and courts, we were able to recover just under 10% of the loss. So it was a material loss to the business. And obviously in manufacturing, or agriculture, you're dealing with high turnover, really tight margins. And so at that point, I was like, this is mad. I've got all this protection and security on my credit card when I go and transact a $10 payment at the local, gas station. Why don't I have that same level of security on my $3 to $4 million of AP going through the business a week? Like it's basically protected through manual review. And in that point, we realized there was nothing else in market to solve that problem, and so we went about solving it ourselves. And now, 1,100 customers plus later, they're specializing in Acumatica. We now obviously solve the AP challenge as well as making sure that your business payments are protected. So we're going to talk about those two sides of the product today and the capability to make things more streamlined, more efficient, but also mitigate the risk of things going wrong in your organization from a B2B payments perspective. So why trailed? A really key thing is we're obviously embedded as a module in Acumatica. So I shouldn't have to say this, but a native Acumatica integration that actually works. There's a lot of different solutions out there that talk about integrating with Acumatica that don't really have that depth of capability or integration really nutted out. As I mentioned, 1,100 customers, more than 500 of them are on Acumatica. So nearly 50% of the customer base. The two things that we fundamentally focus on is the AP processing and efficiency time that we can save, as well as making sure that your business is protected against any potential fraud, errors, internal or external, and mistakes that can happen along the way. The other key item is time to value. So the ability to have the software implemented in days. We've had customers operating and live with Trailed and Acumatica within a week. It's very straightforward, very much plug and play, and it's also endorsed and sold on the Acumatica price list, meaning you just literally order it through Stellar One. It goes on as a SKU, and it gets attached to your normal Acumatica billing and process with Acumatica as a normal module. So to talk about sort of the complexity around AP, everyone on this call, given the businesses that you're in, will have experienced some of these challenges. I'm not going to read through all of them. As you would expect, printing and filing documents, chasing down purchase orders, checking have the items been receipted, looking for things like land cost allocations, who needs to approve what, trying to chase down, historical information. All of this happens in everyday businesses that we operate. And obviously there's a whole bunch of manual process that follows it. So what Trailed is trying to do is make these complex challenges around AP very much simple and streamlined. And we'll show a lot more of that when we get into the actual product itself. From a payments perspective, Trailed has the ability to deal with everything from invoice ingestion via email all the way through the execution of a payment. So if you're manually spending time cutting checks and putting them in envelopes and sending them out to suppliers, or processing FX payments through manual Swift and IBAN, or ACH, EFT, we provide an executive overview and dashboard. So you've got insights as to what's happened throughout the entire process, all the way through to the ability to be able to actually execute the payment through the TrailPay platform. And so we'll cover that as well as we get through the product. As you'll be aware, there's a myriad of different solutions out there for AP. The thing here on the table matrix is highlighting the key differences fundamentally between Trailed and aggregated other solutions out there, so you guys can have a bit of an understanding as to what we do and why we're different. Obviously, highlighted in blue is some of our core capability, fundamentally available in Trailed and not in other solutions, like that banking level security and always-on anomaly detection, our government-based checks, supplier verification, and our executive payment review dashboard for payment review and execution. So we're going to cover all of those features as we get through. So now that we've finally made it through the presentation deck, I am going to jump straight into the fun part, which is the actual core product. Feel free, as I go through the core product, to raise any questions in the chat that you may have, and we'll get to those at the end. So I'm going to share my screen now on the Trailed product, and hopefully you guys can see that okay. Derek and Carl, is that clear for you guys?
Yes, sir.
It is.
Okay. So, guys, one of the key things here that's really important to understand is Trailed, as I mentioned, is just like a module in Acumatica. It's like buying the purchasing module or a general module. Essentially, here you can actually see Trailed is embedded inside of the Acumatica UI. So I'm logged into Acumatica. I can see my multiple companies and branches. Under the Acumatica menu, you would normally be familiar with the bills and adjustments area, where you'd go in and you'd key in your invoices. With Trailed, it's just a module inside of Acumatica where you'll see there's three key components: the Trailed AP automation, three-way matching, and approval workflow engine. You've got the Trailed supplier onboarding and verification process, and you've got the Trailed payments and processing. So as I mentioned, everything from ingestion to execution on the payment side. If we just drill into the AP engine to start with, I want to show you how the invoices come in and are ingested in the platform. Essentially, most of our customers will have these invoices come through directly via email. So we've got an Outlook connector where it will auto forward your invoices based on key criteria directly into the Trailed in tray for processing. If you needed to, you could always drag and drop them into the screen or process them on demand. You could process 50, 20, whatever it might be. I would say 90 8% of customers use the email connectivity. It's the fastest way to get the documents in. It's the most efficient. What I want to do here as well is go through a couple of different examples, a couple of PO and non-PO related invoices, just so you get a feel of how it works across the board for all of your supplier documents. As the invoices are running through this automation engine, it's classifying all the data, it's extracting it, it's understanding the information, and it's analyzing it from a risk perspective. Within a couple of seconds, the invoices are going to process and they're going to land directly in the in tray, waiting for a review. Now, as the invoices are running through, they're also being assessed from a risk point of view, saying, is there any anomaly here? Is it a high risk invoice? Is it a low risk invoice? What potential issues could there be? Whether it be a bank details change, a duplicate invoice, whatever it might be, you're going to be able to see that straight away. And as the invoices land, you're going to see the invoices land in a draft state with all the data being extracted and classified. So here as an AP clerk, I can see the invoices that have come in and need to be actioned. I can see all the data that's been extracted. So the invoice number, which company or location it relates to or branch, the invoice date, the due date, and who the invoice has been assigned to for additional review if required. You'll also see here the system is smart enough to order your invoices based on which ones are related to a purchase order in Acumatica, which ones have been receipted. So there's a three-way matching capability here. Which ones are PO related but haven't yet been receipted. We can have, say, if it's a condition that you have to have items receipted before you pay the invoice, we can have them put on hold, continually polling Acumatica for the items that have been receipted. And then you've got your non-PO related invoices. So every invoice document type should run through Trailed. If I just drill into the first supplier invoice example here, I just want to show you what this screen does. So on the left-hand side, you've got a copy or digital copy of the supplier invoice that's come through via email. In terms of your secondary documents, they're all appended here under the document management section linked to the invoice. On the right-hand side, you've got three key components. You've got the header level data extraction, you've got the line level matching and the automatic linking to the purchase orders, the receipts. We also deal with complexities around lander costs. So if you're dealing with a lot of distribution, manufacturing, you're dealing with things like freight, insurance handling, we can deal with that. If you're in construction, we can deal with your subcontracts, your retainage, your holdbacks. So all this level of complexity in terms of the matching and validation process, we're capable of managing. We've got a tracking and an audit log of everything from invoice ingestion to payment execution. So you've got a track history of it. And we've got our pre-populated coding. So our GL allocations, our sub-account classifications, and who the invoice has been assigned to. I'm going to go through each one of these components one by one because they're really important as to the way the system works. So you'll see here, it's pulled out all the invoice, all the supplier, and all the pricing information directly from the invoice document. Now, if I click on one of these fields, you should be able to see the big red box around the invoice number on the screen. The unique part about Trailed is OCR is very much a commodity, okay? The value in the OCR is extracting the data, but the data doesn't mean anything if you don't understand it or you don't classify it. So what Trailed enables you to do is we have a proprietary classification engine that understands, is it a numeric field? Is it a date? Is it a string? Is it a character? What does this data actually mean within the context of your business? And what that means in business practice is if this supplier invoice came through and it populated it based on the invoice total, and I turn around as the AP clerk and say, actually, we never pay Ozone Organics in our business on the invoice total. We always pay them on the balance outstanding or the balance due. I can select that. The system is now going to memorize that for my business, we always pay the supplier on the amount due, and that's what we should be populating as the invoice total. So that machine learning is enabled on every single field. So whether it be, the purchase order number in order to do the matching and validation against, whether it be the invoice date, whether it be the due date, it doesn't really matter. The system is understanding and learning how you work with your vendors within the context of your business. As it's automating that data, it's also running it through our supplier fingerprinting and supplier and risk validation checks. So if this supplier invoice, for example, came through and it had payment terms, between the invoice date and due date is 7 days, but your contracted terms in Acumatica were 30 days, it's going to flag an urgent payment warning. If the supplier invoice came from an unusual location, like an IP address or metadata tracking in Nigeria, and you normally deal with the supplier based in California, it's going to track that information. It's going to say, okay, is anything on the document different as well as the geolocation? It's going to say, okay, yes, the payment details detected reflected on the invoice have actually changed. They're different to what you've got stored in your supplier master data in Acumatica, and they're different to what you've transacted with the supplier over the previous 12 months. So this is just a couple of examples as to what the system looks for, but we have over 150 data checks that we're running, where both government and third party, things like banking validation, but excess supplier charges, inactive government registration details, tax validation, duplicate invoices. We're trying to make sure that as we're making this process efficient, that we're also not letting anything through that could be problematic or impact the bottom line of the organization. So in this case, though, the invoice has come through, everything's been extracted, it looks fine. This is a PO related invoice. So what's happened here is it's actually extracted the PO number off the document, and it's automatically read all of the invoice lines, extracted all that data, and matched it to the purchase order line. So here's the original purchase order that was raised in Acumatica. Here are the items that have been receipted. It's matched each of the lines on the different description, quantity, unit cost, and total. And you can see here it's brought through the relevant GL coding from the purchase order. So GL allocations, sub accounts, even our project classifications, project task, cost codes, everything like that. If the invoice came through for, let's just say the supplier was trying to overcharge us, say they sent us an invoice of $3,200, it's going to flag a $1,000 variance here between the initial purchase order that was raised and the actual supplier invoice that's come through. This can be automatically defaulted back to the PO owner in Acumatica who raised the PO for them to investigate. Maybe it's a site manager, maybe it's a person in the warehouse, and we can even put this on hold and go back and forth between procurement and finance to deal with this accordingly. In this case, there's no need to do that. You can see here the invoice has come through. It does match exactly the purchase order and receipt. Happy days. This can be submitted. Now, every single action that I've just taken can be completely automated with zero-touch invoicing. So we have a configuration here. You'll see that it's now been auto-approved based on it being low risk, matching the purchase order and receipt at a line level, and it's auto-approved and sent it into Acumatica for payment. What we have here with zero-touch invoicing is the ability to say if the invoice comes through, it matches each of the purchase order and receipt lines, then we can auto-submit it given it's low risk, auto-approve it, and auto-export it given it's within our variance threshold by either percentage or amount when dealing with that vendor. So the automation allows you to deal with the exceptions, and obviously you can send everything through an approval workflow, but manage your approvers' time as well because it's valuable time that can be used in other areas. For any non-PO related invoices, they should also run through Trailed. So in this case, you can see the system has done what it should do. It's flagged and said it's a duplicate invoice. If I were to try and submit this, you can see it's saying it's a duplicate, just be wary of it, and it's automatically put it on hold. In this case, if it wasn't a duplicate invoice, I could easily turn around and you can see it's extracted all the header level data. But what happens if I need to read all these line details or split the invoice to different percentage or amounts to different GL codes or projects and things like that? I can simply do that with a click of a button. I can click add from invoice. All of my header and line level detail has now been extracted. I can even teach it which column I want it to look at for the calculation. And you can see here our default level coding allocations have been populated. I can even teach it for, this particular description for this particular supplier that I actually want it to not go to our base GL code next time. I want it to go to, our other expenses GL code when dealing with this particular description for that supplier. So the system is able to understand, learn, and memorize what your coding allocation should be and how you should be working with your vendor based on previous history. In this case, when I submit this invoice, it'll run through the approval process, but because it's duplicate, I'm going to trash it straight out and it's going to drop me to the next invoice in my queue. If you're dealing with any complex invoices, so things where you've got multiple invoices inside a single PDF file that have come through from a scanner or whatever it might be, they can be emailed directly into Trailed from the scanner or just be run through our splitting and recommendation engine. The system is going to automatically detect as the multi-page invoice or multiple invoices inside the PDF come through via email. It's going to use our splitting engine to identify where the page split should be based on the unique invoice numbers and page numbers. So in this case, it's saying there's 3 separate invoices from Avis that have been scanned through. Here's invoice 1, 2, and 3 with 3 separate invoices and page numbers. So it's going to now automatically split that out. So instead of having to save every invoice one by one by one by one and process it into Acumatica, you now have an automated way to be able to deal with that in a seamless process. For any exceptions or problematic invoices, obviously we've got the built-in approval workflow. So from an approval standpoint, if you have a high-risk invoice that comes through, it's going to be routed out for additional review and approval. Now this is completely platform agnostic, so it really doesn't matter if it's if it's on mobile or on desktop. It doesn't really matter what platform, and I'll show you the mobile view in a minute. But essentially here, what you'll see is this invoice has been routed to me because it's saying it's a high risk invoice. It's for nearly $3,000 when our normal supplier average, based on a 12-month bell curve and standard deviation, has never been greater than $2,100. So this is a material increase in excess supplier charges based on our normal pattern and behavior with this supplier over a decent period of time. In combination with a payment details alert, I can see here that my colleague has taken an initial look at this. They're unhappy with it and routed it to me. I actually want to route it to Karen, who generally deals with this supplier, for her to look at it and reassign it. Or I can turn around here and say, I've got it. I'm going to follow up the supplier directly, or push it back to finance and say it's a fraudulent invoice, or it's a pricing concern, or I'm on it and investigating. So I have the ability to be able to manage this effectively within the platform, and deal with this exception in terms of the approval workflow. Automatic approvals and routings can be set up pretty easily. So we have a fully built-in workflow rule-based engine. So things like the auto approval based on matching, if it's a low-risk invoice and it's a three-way match, the purchase order and receipt, and the line details, line details match on quantity and unit cost and all that sort of stuff. We've got the ability here in the different rules to set up conditions that make sense for the way that we operate our business. So whether it be adding certain variants based on amount or percentage to the auto approval conditions, whether it be saying I want to set up multi-level approval hierarchies based on, if the invoice comes in and it meets these three conditions, whether it be GL code, supplier, invoice total, whatever it might be, then it routes through to Karen or Mary, whoever gets to it first in that particular level of approval, and then it goes through to Mark for secondary level of approval. So there's fully built-in workflow capability here around where invoices should go when an exceptional high-risk invoice is identified. Once the invoices have run through that automation, that matching, that validation process, essentially as a finance team, you have complete visibility across the organization as to where the invoices are at. Are those invoices pending review? Are they waiting to be actioned? Is something being rejected that needs to be investigated? What are our approved invoices that have gone through the matching and validation process? Have they been exported directly across and ready for payment? So once these invoices have been approved and exported, essentially you can set up an auto export and the invoices will land directly in the bills and adjustments section in Acumatica. So I'm just going to log back in because Acumatica has logged me out. And what you'll see is the bill's actually landing in an open release state. So if we just go to one of these invoices, you'll see here, this is an invoice that's just come through from Trailed. You can see the Trailed risk score. You can see the Trailed approver name and the approval date. You can see all the data that would normally be keyed in manually has been automated through the Trailed AP engine. The actual document itself is stored and appended in Acumatica as a part of the export process, as well as any secondary documents. And then you'll also see here, and this is probably a good indicator as well, if your approvers are reviewing on mobile or their iPad or whatever, and they're on site, say they're in construction, and they need to do an approval or upload a secondary supporting document like a packing slip or a subcontract or whatever it might be, that can be done at the approval stage, and that will also sync into the document management area along with the AP invoice. If we drill down into this supplier invoice itself, what you'll see is obviously all the header and line details have been populated. But what's so important is in this case, it's actually a PO related invoice and it's deep linked into the original purchase order that was raised and the actual items that have been receipted. So if I have a look at the data that's been populated and let's see what's done to the purchase order, as the invoices come in from Trailed into Acumatica, it's validated and matched it to the original purchase order. It's now closed out that purchase order because it's been fulfilled based on the invoice. If I go to my PO history, now you've got your AP bill with all your supporting documentation that's come through from Trailed in a release status ready for payment. You've got your linked purchase order that's been closed out, and you've got your items that have been receipted. You've got your three-way match all linked together with your supporting documentation in one location in Acumatica ready for payment. So at this point, most organizations in the Acumatica space will turn around, they'll prepare their payments, they'll select the payments they want to make based on cash forecast and due date of the invoices and things like that. The minute they create that payment file is going to instantly land in Trailed for executive review and sign off. So essentially here under the payments tab, you're going to be able to see the payment files or batches that have been created, how much they're for, and the payment method associated. Is it a check run? Is it an EFT payment? Is it a ACH payment? And I can drill down here as the CFO or the executive responsible for making this $8,500 payment run. And I can see all the 17 different suppliers that we're about to make payment to in this batch file. And I can see it's waiting my approval, even though it's been batched up and completed in Acumatica, it's waiting my final sign off in Trailed. I can see under the payment file, I can see each of the payment reference numbers for the supplier and that they've all gone through the supplier onboarding process. So through our vendor portal, they've gone through the onboarding process, they've been verified and checked, and they've got the tick of approval. In this case, I can see all the different payment amounts to each of the vendors, and it's instantly identified the 3 payments that are problematic and identify that these payments are all completely fine. So if I have a look at the 3 that it's identified, it's saying this $988 for Ozone Organics looks like a pretty material peak in our normal transactional trend. So I want to see what invoices this relates to. But most of the time in today's environment, I'd be having to go back to AP as the CFO and say, which invoices are these? Can you share them with me? I want to just check it out. With Trailed, it's all nested together in a single executive view. So you can see all the invoices that have come in, the approval path of those invoices, where do they go, who assessed them. You can see the approval date, and you can see instantly that $988 is in your payment file, but only $883 went through in terms of invoice value for that supplier for that period of time. So someone's key to bill directly in for Ozone Organics into Acumatica without it going through our automation and risk profile assessment. So I can tag Karen here and say, Karen, what's going on here? Why have we got $105 that bypass the trailed risk assessment process? The other thing here is if I needed to drill down into any of these overlooked invoices, whether it be a high or medium risk invoice, I can drill down before I execute the payment and I can actually see what happened at that period of time. So I can see, the invoice, I can see the purchase order and receipt that are linked to any landed cost allocations. I can see the tracking and audit history. And if this was a high risk invoice, for example, and Adam, reviewed it at 609 and approved it at 610, I'm going to be turning around and saying, did Adam actually look at the invoice or did he just go approve to get it off his desk because he had a million other things to do for his day? So from a behavioral analytics point of view, you do have monitoring and control over what's going on in the organization and a final hurdle before you actually execute the payment to make sure everything's aligned with your expectations. At this point, you can execute each of the payments that you're comfortable with based on the assessment or what you've validated. Or you can actually come down here and you can approve and execute the entire payment batch. So we have Trailed Pay, which enables us to do the full payment execution. So the printing and distributing of your checks directly to your suppliers, the execution of your domestic and international payments, so both ACH, EFT, FX, IBAN, and wires. So we've got the ability to execute all of your payments in different subsets of what you require. So from what we've gone through so far, obviously for everything from ingestion of an invoice through the matching, approval workflows, payment execution, we also have a fully embedded supplier onboarding process through our vendor portal. So every time you add a supplier to the vendor portal into Acumatica, it will run our verification and supplier checks from the very beginning. Underneath that supplier, you're going to be able to see all the history, so their compliance documentation, 1099s, all of the invoices that have come in, and you can even set up specific supplier configurations based on our touchless invoicing. So there's a bunch of capability there. Whether it be invoices, suppliers, supplier statements, we also have automatic reconciliation to supplier statements, or payments. Any documents that are appended here are stored in our document repository, giving you single access to search for things in a quick and easy manner. So, if I'm searching for a particular document type, say a invoice attachment for a particular supplier, data. I can turn around and free to text search. Everything's free to text search, but I can turn around and search for that within seconds. And now it's available and popped up as a part of that free to text search. So, we are able to do everything, as I said, from basically invoice ingestion to payment execution with the validation and matching against your purchase orders, your receipts, your subcontracts, your landed costs, and your core capabilities inside of Acumatica as a part of the core module and offering. So just quickly switching back gears, and I'll go back to the presentation here quickly. But obviously, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what's the ROI? What's the payback? So this was a study done by the IRS and Forrester Consulting to look at what is the overhead cost of processing AP from invoice ingestion to payment execution. So that includes headcount, salary, chasing down invoices, looking for missing receipts, trying to check whether there was actually a purchase order, dealing with landed costs, everything to possibly get you through to batching and processing of a payment. And they estimated the average cost was approximately $26 per document. With Trailed, with a system like Trailed, obviously you've got the security aspect, which I'll talk to in a second, but the automation aspect on its own should save you approximately $19 per document. And if you apply that across an average of 300 documents per month, you'd be saving at least $60 to $70,000 per annum in terms of headcount cost or operational cost, not just headcount cost, but just general operational cost. And if you think about that, like what could your team be doing with that extra time and resource? Could you be doing better procurement? Could you be doing better analysis? Are there more value-added tasks that you could be doing other than data entry, matching, and validation that can be done with AI-enabled tools like Trailed? And then there's the question of, well, what happens when something goes wrong? We all know, mistakes and errors happen in everyday life, right? Whether it be an internal mistake, overlooking something, or external mistake where something's missed. These are the sort of evolving threats that are happening out there. Year on year, we're seeing more and more of these business email compromise attacks coming in more sophisticated in different ways. And obviously, we want to make sure that your business is protected. So as much as we've got the ROI and the payback on the automation side, it's how do we balance that with also protecting your business?